Hello and welcome to our lightning lunch sessions here at Liverpool John Moores University. Today's session will be about law. My name's Caroline Berry and I'll be your host for the session, and I'm joined by Rachel Stalker from our School of Law. So before Rachel starts talking, I'll just explain how the session's going to work. Although you can see and hear us, we can't see or hear you, so you can sit back, relax and enjoy the talk. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, however. So if you have a look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A button. If you want to click on that, you can type in any questions that you might have for Rachel. If anything pops into your head while she's talking, please do type away and I'll read out the questions at the end and hopefully Rachel will be able to answer them for you. Okay, so without further ado, I will hand you over to Rachel and please enjoy the talk.
Thanks very much, Caroline. Right, let me get the slides ready. So thanks for joining me and Caroline today. This talk is about the ghost in the machine. What can the law do to help vulnerable people? I'm Rachel Stalker. I'm a solicitor and I'm the Clinical Legal Education Programme Leader in the School of Law at John Moores. So yes, that is a real name. It is a real surname and not something to be worried about. Your first piece of law I've put on the slide for you here is an extract from the Protection from Harassment Act 1997, which is why you'll probably all think of unwanted communications and people following you when you hear my name. But I can reassure you, I'm not a criminal solicitor or a criminal indeed. The name stalker just means someone who hunts with eagles or falcons of some kind. So someone a long time ago, my family was doing that at some point in the Gaelic speaking countries. But that's nothing to do with what I am going to speak to you today about, or indeed what I do for a living. Being a solicitor and a academic, so not an academic, but a practitioner working in the academic field, I teach the law every day and also practice it. So I'm going to start with what seems like a simple question, but actually has sometimes quite a complex answer. What is the law anyway? Probably when you think of the law, you'll think of Suits or Silk, TV programs like that, which are very much focused on the criminal law, but the law is much more than that. It regulates literally the air we breathe, the houses we live in, the jobs we do, even our right to be alive in the first place. It covers everything from when we're allowed to cross the street to when we're allowed to go to war with another country, and literally absolutely everything in between. There's a beautiful, very short and very easy to read book, very cheap as well, by Tom Bingham called The Rule of Law, which I recommend to anybody with any interest at all in the law. And he explains that the law and living in a country where we have the rule of law means that all persons and authorities within the state, whether public or private, so government or companies or whoever, should be bound by and entitled to the benefit of laws publicly and prospectively promulgated and publicly administered in the court. That's a long way of saying everyone has to know what the law says. Everyone has to be able to find it easily. It applies to everyone equally, regardless of whether you're the Queen of England or, I don't know, the postman who's probably going to knock at my door any minute because I'm doing a live session. And the law doesn't change the past. The law looks to the future. If we change the law to make something an offence, we look to the future. We don't go into the past because that would be unfair. We need to know what the law says so we can regulate how to behave. So without that, the law's kind of meaningless. And access to the courts is public. We do not conduct the law behind closed doors. Why do we have the law? That's what the law is. Why do we have it? Well, because basically we can't just get on with each other. If we all behaved in the same way and followed the same rules of conduct and behaviour, we wouldn't need the law. But the fact is, the whole point of the law is to find a way of mediating between an individual's own values and the public norms or rules needed to govern how to deal with disagreements between people. So this, mark of it says, means lawyers have a very special place in the legal system We are there to help those disagreements get a resolution of some kind and for justice to be done. Now, when you think about legal study, you'll be, if you come to university to study law, you're shining a light on what the law is. So you're using it as a bit of a torch. You're looking at what the law actually says and finding out what that says in a number of different areas: contract, employment, negligence, crime, of course. But it's also a sword. The law is not just something you find in books. It's obviously, as I've said, something that touches all of our everyday life all the time. Even something as simple as going out to Costa and buying a coffee, or whether you're allowed to go in with a face mask or not at the moment. So the law is something that's used in the real world, and you can use it as a sword as much as you can, a torch. But you need to have both together, really, to be able to be a good academic and understand the law, and also to apply it in real life. The law is changing all the time, in fact. It's changed a huge amount since I was at university. And we have to constantly be keeping on top of those changes. And that changes because society changes, and our ideas of what should be allowed and what should not, what's acceptable and what's not, change all the time. So that's very much the kind of image of the law that you'll see, the law being used as a sword. So there are at the moment more than 150,000 solicitors like myself, so lawyers who consult with clients. We advise them about a disagreement, about a case they have, and if we need to, we'll build a case for them to take to court. And there are about a tenth as many, 15,000 barristers. Those are the ones with the wigs, the ones who consult with solicitors to build a case, and they present it in the court hearing. And those are all the ones currently practicing in England and Wales. Note that I don't say the UK. Scotland and Northern Ireland have different legal regimes for practice. So in the rest of this talk, I'm going to be talking about non-criminal law, and I'm going to be talking about England and Wales. And of course, there's Megan. If it doesn't work out in legal practice, you can just marry a prince. So yes, I'm on the solicitor side of things. I'm from Huyton in Liverpool originally. I studied at Oxford University, and then I went to do my training contract and become a solicitor at a firm called Linklaters, which is a Magic Circle firm. So it's one of the top 5 in the country. I did 6 months working as a volunteer at Liberty, which is the human rights charity and civil liberties charity, doing litigation, that is disputed cases, at the European Court of Human Rights. And then when I became a qualified solicitor, I was too homesick. I moved back to Liverpool, and I worked at Waitmans and Addleshaws in Manchester for a number of years, doing banking and finance disputes litigation. So basically any disagreement that a bank might have with anybody, whether one of their customers or another bank or whoever. Waitmans and Addleshaws are quite big commercial law firms as well. And certainly, as a lawyer in practice, I was very busy. There are plenty of legal problems around in the world for lawyers to solve, because people are always finding different ways to have disagreements with each other. Thinking about civil problems, so everything except criminal law, 64%, more than 6 in 10 adults, experienced a legal problem in the past 4 years. And more than 53% of those had a contentious problem. That is not just, needing to understand what the document says or help writing a contract or something like that, where there's no opponent, there's no one fighting against you. A contentious problem means you've got a serious disagreement with someone, and it may well have to go to court to be decided. People who get professional help when they have a legal problem are much more likely to feel they've had a fair outcome for their case, because someone's been able to explain all the way through what their rights are, what the best thing is to do to try to get a resolution, and what the likely outcome is going to be. So they don't get a surprise at court when the judge makes their decision. But this is important because our court system, our legal system in this country, is adversarial. That means the legal system assumes you will have a lawyer with you to give you advice and guidance about what the law says, and what to do to solve your problem, because it's very, very complex. And it's for legal representatives to put their case to the judge at court and persuade the judge that their version of the event is the correct one. And so that's the way the decision should be made. But in fact, most people in our country can't access the protection of the law when they most need it. So there's a recent study being done by the Law Centres Network, and they run advice centres across the country. And they found that millions of people in the UK are caught in the justice gap, as they call it. That means that if they have a legal problem, they will be forced to choose between no legal protection or falling into poverty. That's the justice gap, the distance between what you need and what you can afford. This is a huge population, it's literally millions of people. So it includes 44% of working people with no children, 51% of working couples with one newborn child, 76%, that's 3/4, of working single parents with one primary school child. I've highlighted the 44% of working single people with no children because I'm thinking about those of you who are at the talk today, that'll be you when you're graduates, probably. So just shy of half would fall into the justice gap if you ever had a legal problem. That's an enormous amount of people. And it's a problem because it's really expensive to find a lawyer. We've said already, really, you need one to help you through the legal system. It's what our legal system assumes. But it's much more costly nowadays to have a lawyer than ever before. There used to be a lot more legal aid around, that is public funding for certain types of case. But in 2013, the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act came into force. And whereas before, if you had a problem with employment law and with many family law cases, you could get some kind of funding to pay for your representative, that has now been taken away. Nowadays, the majority of family law cases involve at least one party who doesn't have a lawyer acting for them at all. This means that people might go to court when they don't have a good case. It means they don't understand what's happening in court. Court hearings take a lot longer. And certainly it's much more likely they're not able to put the case across well. And that's a big increase of likelihood of there being miscarriages of justice, so decisions that aren't fair. But the court can only make a decision based on the representations, the spoken submissions and written papers that people give them. Imagine having to do that without a lawyer when you're going through something extremely stressful, like maybe having your children taken away from you. Even a junior solicitor can charge an hourly rate of maybe £100 an hour, depending on what firm they're working at. When I was in private practice as a junior associate, I was charging about £375 an hour. Hasten to add, that does not come to me direct. A lawyer's fees are billed to the client and the money goes into the law firm, and then people are paid at different scales. And that's fine. But there's not a lot of people who can afford those kinds of rates. Even just to get one letter written or part of a case done can cost many thousands of pounds. Barristers certainly can charge tens of thousands of pounds for taking your case to court if you have them working for you right the way through the case, which ideally you would want. Well, what can people afford? Well, just looking at those numbers, you can hear that's a lot of money to pay for a lawyer. And generally speaking, there's a high level of poverty in many areas of the country, certainly in Liverpool. So by poverty, we mean households that earn less than 60% of what most people earn. So less than £195 per week, say, for a lone parent with 2 children. There are 14 million people in the country living below the poverty line in the UK. That's about 1 in 5 people. And about 1/3 of all children are living in poverty. And 1 in 3 families receive benefits of some kind or other. That's what the Department for Work and Pensions tell us. Is it that people just need to work a bit harder to get more money? Well, no, because unemployment is very low in this country. Not many people don't have a job right now when you look at the general population. And in fact, 2/3 of households who live under the poverty line have at least one person who's in work. So it's not for lack of trying that people don't have a great deal of money just for their lives generally, let alone if they have a legal problem. Now, in Liverpool, this is something very much on my mind because we are the fourth most deprived local authority in England. And that's getting worse. We used to be seventh, and we're getting poorer. And some wards in this city are in the top 1% of most deprived in the whole country. So certainly there are high levels of poverty in the area where I am living and working. Okay, we know that there are lots of lawyers around, but not many people can afford them. Well, can you just sort things out without lawyers? I mentioned that quote from Tom Bingham at the beginning. The law's there for everyone to find out about. Maybe you can just do it yourself. This is certainly possible, but in fact, people don't often get the help of the law even when they should. In a big, large-scale survey between 2010 and 2012, when people have a legal problem, about 87% of them say that they have legal problems. But in only 6% of those cases did people get the help of a lawyer. And in a further 4%, they got help from the advice sector, so probably a free form of advice. Mostly, people try to handle problems alone. About 43% of them did that. And sometimes they do it without even telling anybody else. So not even with help from friends or family. That's about another 15% of people. About 3.6 million legal problems go unsolved each year, so says the Legal Services Board. In other words, there are millions and millions of what I like to think of ghosts in the machine, or maybe I should say ghosts outside the machine of the legal system. All these issues and problems and disagreements that the legal system doesn't resolve and that people themselves can't sort out on their own. What do I mean by a legal problem? As I mentioned earlier, lots of TV programs you'll see about the law are about criminal cases, but there's plenty of other stuff in there as well. So that it can look like having a problem with your boss or someone you work with, your neighbours, the police, your partner or your ex-partner, a product or a service you paid for that maybe doesn't work or wasn't what you asked for, the money you have or debts you might have, an injury you suffered, the place where you live, whether you're renting it or whether you bought it, benefits you claim or want to claim. Someone may be discriminating against you because of your gender, your race, your religion, or what we call other protected characteristics. So just because of who you are, people are mistreating you. And even right up to being allowed to live or work in this country at all. Most people across most levels of society and education are actually unsure when a problem like this becomes a legal one. And they don't always know which area of law their problem might relate to. This goes for people who left school when they were 16 as much as people who left university when they were highly educated professional people. In other words, in the country, there is a very low level of legal capability. Unless someone's got a lawyer helping them, they really don't know where to start. There's another concern as well, because often people who can't afford a lawyer will have other kinds of vulnerability as well, all mixed up together. Some authors called Moorhead and Sefton identified 11 of these: being a victim of violence, having depression or alcoholism, being a young lone parent, being a drug user, having a history of imprisonment, having mental illness, living in temporary accommodation with children, being illiterate. We get quite a lot of illiterate clients in our law clinic, which we'll talk about in a bit, having terminal illness, or having been involved with social services, usually because of children. Another writer, Liz Trinder, suggested that not having English as your first language should also be added. And certainly I've got students who volunteer at court, helping people who go there without a lawyer. And if someone turns up and their English is not good, it's just a question of whether someone volunteering that day happens to speak the language that they do. If not, then it's likely that person will drop the case or not feel able to go to court because they just don't understand what's happening at all. So solving a legal problem isn't just about fairness or getting that particular problem sorted out. People with legal problems may also have other vulnerabilities already. And people who have a legal problem will often go on to have a physical or mental health issue. And that's either caused by the legal problem or it's something they've got already, and the legal problem and the stress it brings makes it worse. And a legal problem can make a lot of other serious problems come up in your life too. So if you are living with your partner and you have a breakup, perhaps you're the one who has to leave the property. If you get kicked out and you haven't got family or friends you can stay with long term, it's very likely you'll become homeless. And once you're homeless, your ability to have a job or to get employment is seriously prejudiced. If you are supposed to be caring for children, it's very likely that your contact with those children will be taken away from you or severely limited. So very quickly, one thing going wrong can escalate into others. Or equally, losing your job. If you can't lose your job, you can't pay for where you live. You're going to have debt problems, you may become homeless, and so on. So you get clusters of issues happening. So getting a problem solved early or getting advice about what to do early on when the problem first happens is very important. And yet, this is something a lot of people don't do. It also comes down to what our whole idea of what a good country to live in should be about. Just having laws written down and there for you to follow or to look at if you have a problem really isn't enough. I mentioned earlier Tom Bingham and his book, The Rule of Law, and this idea of what a country under the rule of law looks like. To live in a country that can be said to be subject to the rule of law rather than just something very arbitrary and unfair and you can't work out what's going on. There are 8 key principles that you have to observe, and for the purposes of today, the really important ones include that the law has to be accessible, intelligible, that means you can understand it, it's in clear language. It's got to be clear, it's got to be predictable. Laws should apply equally to all. Well, as we've seen, that's probably not actually happening because not everyone can enforce their rights. The law has to afford adequate protection of fundamental human rights. Again, only if you know what those are and you can understand them. And it says also the state must provide a way of resolving disputes which the parties cannot themselves resolve. Well, sure, there are plenty of courts to go to, but as we've seen, it's very difficult to do that without a lawyer. And in fact, about half of all courts have closed since 2010, again, for cost saving. So if you have to go to court, you might have quite a long journey to get to your most local one. Maybe you have to go on public transport. It may take you several hours. You may have problems affording to get there. So yet again, some more barriers which may cause issues. So if people can't get access to lawyers, this is possibly something that may undermine being able to say we live in a country subject to the rule of law. It's not just us. Sadly, the UK is not alone in having problems about access to justice. The UK ranks only 79th internationally in terms of how accessible and affordable our justice system is. This is a real problem because it's all very well studying law, practicing law, as I do. But if most people can't understand what their rights are or what action they have to take to protect or enforce those rights, then that legal system that I've studied about has certainly a lot less worth. There are about 4 billion people worldwide who are estimated to live outside the protection of the law. That's an awful lot of people. And for those people, the law is an abstraction. It's something just out there on paper, kind of meaningless, or it might be a threat, but it's not something they can use to exercise their basic rights, which is one of the key purposes of the law in the first place. So what can we do about it? We've said a lot of quite scary statistics, and there are certainly lots of causes for concern, but there's a lot we can do as well. Public legal education, so telling people what their rights are and how they can use them, is very important. And giving free legal advice without expecting to be paid for it can make a really positive difference as well. These kinds of activities can create lots of positive impacts. So increasing people's legal knowledge is important. You can resolve conflicts, and you empower people to solve their own conflicts, even though they can't afford a lawyer or legal advice. It improves people's health outcomes, and it can encourage institutional change. It can mean that public bodies change the way they operate to make things fairer. Improving health, strengthening education, increasing people's income. You can even, in the long term, with the right activity, bring about change within governments and other institutions. And policy changes to the law, changes to the rules and guidance, which means that more vulnerable people can get the help that they need. The great thing for me as a lawyer and an educator, and the great thing for you as somebody thinking of studying law, is that anybody with legal knowledge can really make a positive difference. So that includes someone who's an undergraduate law student. You don't have to be a 20 years qualified top QC or barrister to be able to help people. There's a lot you can do just with a small amount of legal knowledge set up as a scheme in the right way. So one of the big parts of my job is running the Legal Advice Centre at John Moores School of Law. I set this up in 2014, and we've had, these figures are slightly out of date. We've seen many hundreds of clients over the years since 2014, and given certainly about, by this point, I think, £750,000 worth of free legal advice. We get volunteer lawyers coming in to supervise my students, who'll interview a client, help them understand their problem, find out the facts, and then research a letter of advice afterwards that they can use as a roadmap then to help resolve their problem. And the scheme is now being expanded, and the law clinic is becoming a subject that you can study every single year of your degree from your first year. So from your first year, you can start observing and shadowing the lawyers working in the clinic. And then in your second year upwards, you get your own client and you can run your own casework under supervision. So these ladies here are in the House of Commons winning an award for their fundraising from the Attorney General. That was in 2019. Two of those are now in practice as barristers. Another is qualifying as a solicitor. And then this picture, all before social distancing. So these pictures are all perfectly legal. These are some of my volunteers from a year or two ago, who, again, many of these looking at them now, they're all working in practice quite happily. And they spent many hours in the clinic helping vulnerable people as well and gaining valuable skills and work experience. And studying the law is really a special choice. And I've got some final figures for you. I would say that the law is special, of course, because I'm a law teacher, but I really do mean it. So looking at the UK population, about 29% of people are aged between 18 and 39, which is when most, not all, but when most people choose to go to university. There are 1.76 million undergraduates in the country. That's about 2% of the UK population, and about half of young people. Of those, 17,000 people are law students. That is 1% of all students. Of that 1%, about 3,000 students volunteer in law clinics around the country. That's 0.004% of the population, and about 16% of all law students. So doing this pro bono work is something not many people do. And we are one of the only universities in the country where you can study the clinic at every level, and everyone who wants to do it is guaranteed to be able to do so. So that relatively small, tiny, in fact, proportion of the population, that relatively small proportion of students who work in the law clinic help about 600 to 800 people a year by 2023, once we've expanded a little bit more. Those people wouldn't always get help. But it's not just about numbers. Every single person who comes to us has a problem they cannot solve on their own. And maybe sometimes they've been dealing with for a long time without any help whatsoever. And every single one of those individuals is important. So every lawyer And by that, I mean anyone with legal knowledge, including my undergraduates. Every lawyer has a great privilege. Look, there's so few people in the country who know about the law compared to the majority of the population. That brings with it a great responsibility, because that justice gap, including many millions of people all around the country from many different walks of life, is not going to go away anytime soon. And I think it's important for us to remember that and to make sure that law students can be part of trying to resolve that, or making things better for some at least, even at the earliest stages of when they're studying. So that's the end of my talk. That's a very brief overview of the work I do and why we do it. And thank you, Caroline, for inviting me. And I'm very happy now. If anyone's got any questions, I'll be very happy to take them. If there isn't a question now, I'm very happy for people to contact me by email. My name is very memorable, so it's easy to remember. And I'm very happy to hear from students who are interested in finding out about the law or what it's like to be a law student.
Thank you, Rachel. So please do type your questions if you have any. Whilst you're doing that, I'll just give you our link, which you can see on the slides, to any other lightning talks that you might want to watch, and you can watch them live or on demand. And if you do want to get in touch with the university, you can contact us on outreach@ljmu.ac.uk. And if you do have any questions for Rachel, please feel free to forward those onto that email if you don't want to ask anything now. So we don't have any questions coming in, so all that remains for me to say is thank you, Rachel, for that really insightful talk about the justice gap and what LJMU is doing our bit to, for students and to, to improve the justice gap. So thank you for that. And thank you to our viewers for joining us today. I hope you found it really interesting like I did, and have a great day. Thank you.